Today, the Society of St Vincent de Paul launched Growing Up in the Cold. The report exposes the grim reality of thousands of families living in energy poverty. 1 in 6 households are spending more than 10% of their income on heating and electricity. Older people and lone parents are particularly affected. Significantly, the report highlights that 42% of children living in the private rental sector experience energy poverty, and 36% of children living in social housing have the same difficulties. The report clearly shows a relationship between poor quality accommodation and energy poverty. The report says that 140,000 children are living in homes with leaks, with damp and with rot. And one parent quoted in the report said, "There are 6 of us with 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen and bathroom. We have 1 small heater and we move it from room to room." 1 small heater, Taoiseach, that is a clear breach of minimum standards. Now, 2 years ago, this House passed a Sinn Féin private member's motion on standards in the private rental sector. It called for an NCT-style certification system for private rented housing, for adequate resourcing for local authorities to ensure meaningful inspection and enforcement, and a review of penalties for non-compliant landlords. 2 years on, Taoiseach, and what has changed? Last year, just 9% of private rental properties were inspected. Of these, 82% failed to meet minimum standards, and less than half of these had their breaches resolved by year's end. Taoiseach, this simply is not good enough. Your failure to resource the enforcement of minimum standards is literally leaving tens of thousands of people, including thousands of children, living in the cold. And your failure to properly fund the maintenance of councils' housing is leaving thousands of the state's tenants in unacceptable conditions. So, Taoiseach, in light of the depressing findings in today's report, will you fully implement the proposals from the 2017 Sinn Féin private member's motion that was passed without opposition in this House? And will you actively consider implementing the 7 recommendations in the St Vincent de Paul report published this morning?
Thanks, Deputy. The Deputy has given me the courtesy of giving a very direct question. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to read that report yet, so I'd have to take a look at it before I could tell you which recommendations we can and cannot implement. But I do want to acknowledge that a lot of people in Ireland experience energy poverty, or fuel poverty, if you prefer to use that term, and that's particularly relevant at this time of the year, during the winter, as days get darker and colder. And we're all aware that quite a considerable number of people every year across the Western world, including Ireland, die as a result of cold-related illnesses. What are we doing about it? 4 main things. First of all, the fuel allowance goes up. It goes up again in January in a few weeks' time. We're investing in retrofitting social housing to make sure that we improve the quality of that housing and make those homes warmer. New building standards mean that pretty much all new buildings and new homes are near zero energy buildings. We have a warmer home scheme that people can apply for to assist them in retrofitting their homes and making them warmer. And also local authorities have a role to play. And I know that many parties opposite are now in controlling positions in local authorities and can choose to reduce or increase the property tax, can choose to reduce or increase commercial rates. And they also need to be held accountable for their decisions where they choose to reduce the property tax instead of investing, for example, in housing and other services, or perhaps choose whitewater rafting as a priority when they get control of local authorities over other issues. I think it would be remiss of the House, though, not to acknowledge the significant progress that has been made in recent years in reducing poverty. And notwithstanding the very many individual stories of people suffering and families in distress, we know from the CSO, from figures they produced just last week, the Survey on Income and Living Conditions, that poverty in Ireland has fallen now for 5 years in a row. It's at its lowest now in a very long time. Deprivation rates are falling, and also income inequality in Ireland is at its 2nd lowest since records began. And that is a considerable achievement, and perhaps doesn't always come across when we tend to focus on hard cases, however real they may be. We're seeing huge progress made in Ireland in terms of reducing poverty, child poverty, deprivation in recent years, and that didn't happen by accident. It happened because we have jobs, because the economy is being well managed, people have jobs to go to, because incomes are rising, because the minimum wage has been increased, because pay is increasing, and take-home pay is increasing too because of reductions in tax and increases in social welfare. And those will continue so long as we manage the economy well and so long as we manage the public finances well too.
Supplementary question.
Thank you, Last Count Caller. The great difficulty, Taoiseach, of course, is in your two-tier economic recovery, increasing numbers of people are being left very far behind. So, yes, we have the fuel allowance, but it's nowhere close to the rising costs of fuel. Yes, we have retrofitting of local authority stock, but it's 2 to 3 years of a wait before you can get your windows or doors replaced. And yes, we do have new standards for building, but they are very much in question when local authorities are not being funded by the government to adequately inspect private rental tenancies. And yes, local authorities do have a role, but let's not forget, thanks to your government and indeed Fianna Fáil before them, local authorities lost 25% of their staff during the recession, the single greatest loss of staff in any sector of the public service. So what I ask you to do, Taoiseach, is study the report from St Vincent de Paul very, very carefully. Study its 7 recommendations and come back to this House and tell us which of them you believe should be implemented. But what I'd also ask you to do is respect the democratic decision of this House of November 2 years ago and fully implement the recommendations of the Sinn Féin private members' motion to ensure that all private rental properties are fully inspected and all minimum standards are fully adhered to, so that no child is living in energy poverty because of the failure of your government to fund adequate enforcement and inspection of properties in the private rental sector or the local government sector.
Thanks, Deputy. I've immense respect for St Vincent de Paul as an organisation. I will take a look at the report and the Government will issue a reasoned response to it as soon as we have a chance to consider it. On the wider issue, Deputy, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. If we had a two-tier economic recovery in Ireland, we wouldn't see income inequality at its lowest, or its second lowest since records began in 2004. We wouldn't see consistent poverty falling dramatically as it has in recent years. We wouldn't see deprivation going down. We wouldn't see 40,000 children lifted out of child poverty in recent years. Yes, things vary from region to region, and of course the experience is not the same for every family. But broadly, the experience in Ireland is one of us going in the right direction. Unemployment down, incomes rising, poverty and deprivation falling. Those are the facts, and no amount of politics or populism or spin can cover up for that. In terms of inspections, the new rent bill this year gives new powers to the Residential Tenancies Board. There are additional inspectors, and the first cases are now underway. By 2021, it's anticipated that 1 in 4 properties will be inspected, so roughly every property getting inspected every 4 years. And money is being provided for this from central government, but it will be helpful that those parties that control local authorities now that could help to contribute to the cost of that should do so, rather than cutting the LPT or investing in whitewater rafting.